Hello. At this week's Board of Trustees meeting, the board approved a plan to submit to the county for the potential reopening of our schools. Now, this plan is not a comprehensive plan outlining each and every detail, but outlines how we will maintain health and safety once we do bring students back on campus. As you might know by now, we will not be opening on January 19th. In the plan, the date is targeted for about March 8th. But as conditions continue to change, and even today we get new words about the governor's plan for reopening, that date may change. What we'd like to do is play a segment of our Board of Trustees meeting in hopes that it outlines for you a better understanding of what the plan is and what the plan says.
Okay, it is 8:05, so why don't we re-begin the meeting? We are now moving on to item I3, approval of our reopening plan. Dr. Mariah.
Yes, our calendar should be full with academics and things that we're focusing on for students. And in our world of this pandemic, we're spending an inordinate amount of time dealing with all that we need to deal with as far as health and safety of our staff, our students. And so it's a little bit interesting time. I'll just leave it at that. Having said all that, one of the pieces so that we may reopen any of our schools is we do need to submit a plan to the county County Office of Education, as well as the health department, and they need to review these plans. Now, these plans are not the details of every aspect of how we operate a school. It's pretty much focused on how are we addressing the safety needs and entrance and exit and all those sort of things. So and Curtis Har's been leading our charge on this one, and he's going to give you an overview of that plan. But I just want you to be prepared that it's not the details of everything else. That's someplace else. This meets the criteria so that we're in the queue if we get ready to reopen our schools at some point during this school year. So with that, let me turn it over to Curtis. This is Curtis Har, our Director of Elementary Education. Curtis, take it away.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moreo. Good evening, President Charrier, Superintendent Moreo, Board of Trustees, and members of E-Cabinet. Tonight, I'm here to share with you components of our district opening plan that we are recommending submission for approval through the Alameda County Office of Education. Kiyoki, if you could advance. So just a couple of things that I wanted to start off with, just for some context, is we just had a long conversation in regards to the resolution, and we are aware at this point in time that we are not allowed to reopen while we're in the purple tier. The county, though, is still accepting reopening plans. Back in October, the county did allow for school district to submit elementary waivers. But when they gave permission to schools in October to reopen, elementary waivers at that point in time went by the wayside and have not returned since. So, a lot of people may be wondering, well, why? Why right now? Well, by submitting the reopening plan now, that will allow us to be prepared to reopen when that authorization is given. As Dr. Moreo prefaced, the county requires us to provide an overview of health and safety. And a lot of the specifics that I'm sure many of you, as you were looking at the reopening plan, were wondering about are addressed in our site COVID plans and our parts of ongoing collaboration with staff. Next slide, Kiyoki. So this slide here is a slide that you've seen before, and I don't know why the left-hand column is missing, but essentially the purpose of this slide is just to show that we're not in this alone. The Alameda County Public Health Department provides guidance for school districts regarding reopening. The ACOE, Alameda County Office of Education, provides us with support. And then it's our responsibility to implement a plan that we put forward using that support and that guidance. Next slide, Kiyoki. Oh, look at that. There it is. One more slide, Kyoki. Thank you so much. So this slide also probably looks familiar. These are the different stages for reopening. And right now we are still in a full distance learning model, looking to move towards the hybrid model, which would be that second stage. But again, I want to reemphasize what Dr. Moreo has been stating just about every board meeting. Our goal remains the same, to return students to campuses as the conditions allow us to do so. Next slide. So this slide here is just a reminder of the different categories that need to be addressed in a reopening plan. So cleaning, disinfection, ventilation, cohorting, and physical distancing. When we're talking about cohorting, that's just how we group students together, what kind of model that we may use to be able to keep our students in small, stable groups. Movement on school campuses, so the entrance, egress, and how students would move around. PPE, including face coverings, screenings and testing for staff and students, staff training, family education, contact tracing when there is a positive COVID case, and then communication, both in regards to components of a safe reopening, as well as communication when we do have a positive COVID case in our district. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the Alameda County Public Health Department gives us guidance. The Office of Education provides support. Our responsibilities are to develop and implement a district reopening plan based upon state and county guidance. One of the things that I just wanted to make note of is, as Trustee Blackman mentioned earlier in this meeting, this is a very moving target. We are currently in version 25 of the county guidance document. It changes almost weekly. Case in point, when we put this on the plan onto the board agenda, the plan that we submitted, the guidance for the amount of time that the recommended time for quarantine has changed just since we posted this item to the board agenda. So this is a living document, and will require us to constantly be editing to make sure that we are implementing the latest guidance from the Public Health Department. The district sets the reopening dates after the authorization to reopen is given by the Alameda County Public Health Department, and we must consider the safety of staff, students, family members, visitors, and the individual needs of both students and families. Next slide, Kyoki. I want to take a moment just to thank the members of our reopening committee for all of their work and the input that they provided in the development of this plan. I am not going to present all 25 plus pages of the reopening plan, as that would put everybody to sleep. But I do want to just take a moment to share some components that are included in the safety plan. So the items that I'm going to share include, but are not limited to, I'm going to start with health and safety. So our purpose is to prioritize the health and safety needs of our students and our staff. This includes ventilation systems, which are currently being upgraded from MERV 8 filters to MERV 13 filters. Hand washing stations being added onto all of our classrooms, as well as hand sanitizing stations in every classroom. That classrooms, workspaces, and restrooms are clean and disinfected at least one time daily, those spaces that are used. Furniture has been rearranged to reinforce the proper distancing as spelled out in the guidance documents. We continue to provide ongoing training for our custodial staff in the updated cleaning protocols, especially as guidance changes. And consistent signage has been ordered, and I believe is arriving this week for us to get out to our sites to be able to communicate the importance of physical distancing, mask wearing, and other safety protocols at each of our sites. There is one bullet point that is not on here, but also is a big part of our health and safety, is making sure that all of our staff and students have the proper PPE to be able to remain safe. Next slide. So we also need to have a COVID response plan as well as COVID prevention. So as a part of this in our reopening plan, we currently have staff screeners. Student screeners are being utilized right now for our students that are currently in extracurricular activities, such as music and athletics, as Dr. Murillo mentioned earlier. These are done prior to the arrival. Upon reopening, this would be confirmed with a verbal check for students to make sure that they have done that daily screener prior to their arrival at school. Staff COVID testing, which we are still currently in the works right now as far as getting all the details of COVID testing worked out. We have identified district COVID liaisons as well as site COVID liaisons to support us with communication with the county office or the county public health departments to provide us with guidance, as well as to support with contact tracing. Also, communication protocols are in place, but consistently being developed as new guidance comes forward, and also working on our isolation room locations and protocols as well. Next slide. So in our district reopening plans, I'm sure that as you were reading them, as I said earlier, that, well, this doesn't mention things like how are students going to arrive on campuses, or, you know, how are bathrooms going to be used when students are there. Therefore, we also have site COVID plans, which each site constructed a team consisting of a variety of staff members on their campus, including teachers and classified staff, to put together some of these specifics as they relate to each individual site. Each site has a different footprint, has different layouts, therefore has different needs when it comes to health and safety. Some of the things in our site COVID plans, again, not limited to these things, but including any site-specific safety needs, including office protocols and staff room or workroom protocols, the entrance and exit points on campus for students and the procedures for a safe drop-off and pickup, developing plans for how students will move on campus to ensure safe distancing. This includes schools that have hallways and staircases. Those things are being addressed at the site level as to how we will ensure safe distancing during those kinds of those periods of the day. And also to specifically identify isolation rooms and restrooms for those isolation rooms, so that if we have a student with symptoms needing to use a restroom, that we don't have other students or staff members using those same facilities. So those are just a few items that I wanted to just bring forth, some of the components of our plan. Last slide, Kyoki. And just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to share this information. And again, just a huge thanks to all of the departments and members of our reopening team, as this has been a Herculean task to just come up with a reopening plan as it relates to all of the different areas that we need to have to ensure the health and safety of staff and students. Thank you.
And that pretty much concludes that presentation of the plan, the overview. Dan, you're muted. Dan, you're still muted there.
Sorry about that. Yes. Is there any clarifying questions? Okay, well, I guess I'll lead us off with one. And then Trustee Rouse. And Trustee Pella. You mentioned COVID testing for staff. Since the COVID test itself is an invasive test procedure, are we authorized to compel staff to take a test? if they don't want to.
We can make it a condition for coming into work, into the school and all of that. That is a piece that, again, when we sit down and talk with our different associations, how we make it happen. Heather, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about how we're planning to begin with the testing plan. Couple things. One, I would say it's not as invasive as you would think. It's self-administered, and it's actually a very easy test for a staff member to give to themselves. It's an oral swab, and it takes a minute or two. The other piece is the testing that we're planning to begin with would start out as an optional plan. And we would have to negotiate with our unions in terms of making it something that would be mandated, and we would work with our negotiations on the plan for a rollout with them. But we would plan to begin as optional.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other clarifying questions? I believe Trustee Rouse was first. Trustee Pelham, did you have your hand up before? No, okay. So Trustee Rouse and then Trustee Blackman.
Thank you. I had a question on the first page of the plan. We have to select a proposed date of reopening. Is it your proposal that we put the March 8th date, knowing that this is not a commitment, this is a proposal, and there are many dates. I've looked at a lot of these plans. This is not a binding date necessarily, but is that your intention, that we will specify that date on the plan?
That is our intent, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Trustee Blackman.
First of all, I want to thank Curtis for your wonderful explanation walkthrough of the information. I appreciate it. And also to reiterate, that this is a required document to the county. It isn't the entirety of our plan. But it does mention learning hubs. And I think there's a bit of, I'm interested to just confirm, we have some charts in the document that delineate the number of staff that are returning to campus or willing to return to campus, the number of students. And presumably those would be what defines the learning hubs or groups that we would create on campus. In the document on page 10, it talks about learning hubs do not refer to in-person instruction with a teacher. That it's just a supervised group with a supervising adult where they engage in distance learning. So are we anticipating that if we do return to campus in this learning hub approach, that in fact, that we are still learning in a distance learning format? Anybody can answer that.
I think the simple, and Curtis, please add to this. The simple answer to that is yes, we would still be there. What this is doing is keeping the door open for us. It doesn't lock a door, saying that if we want to have learning hubs with certificated staff, that we can't. That door is still open for us as an option.
Okay, I just thought it would be helpful to clarify for the families listening that it doesn't guarantee you the opportunity to sit, but it's not necessarily dictating that you wouldn't have your teacher with you. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further clarifying questions? Seeing none, it looks like I haven't been pinged that we have public comments.
See me.
There's
So
no
any,
public comment.
thank you, so. Any comments then on this item? Okay, Trustee Blackman.
I had a question / comment. We just agreed to the resolution and defined it pertaining specifically to the elementary school students. So is that then going to be an overlay for this document, that it pertains predominantly to elementary school students, or are we saying that this is district-wide?
We are saying it's elementary. Curtis, am I right on that one?
Right now, at this point in time, we've only discussed reopening as it relates to elementary school. However, components in the district reopening plan would allow us, if it was safe to do so later on down the road. We have been at least looking at the health and safety component as it relates to K-12 just in case. But as of right now with the submission, we would only be submitting for elementary.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious in terms of the title of the plan, whether it would call that out specifically. There is one item that I wanted to bring up, is that in the resolution, in the action, that perhaps it needs to clarify that this, the board is being requested to approve the reopening plan as it is a submittal to the Alameda County Office of Education for their approval. I believe that it helps if we clarify that the plan is not necessarily our full detailed plan, but it is something we are submitting to the county for their approval, as opposed to, I think it's confusing to say this is our plan when it's really just part of it. Thank you.
And you have that option when you make your motion, that you could state it that way. What's on the document there is just the staff's initial recommendation. But
Okay, with that suggestion, trustee Cohen.
Oh, there you go. I just wanted, it wasn't really a question, so I just want to save it for comment. Just thank the staff for that, because as being someone who's also working through a reopening plan as well, it's not a fast process. So even though we're talking March at the earliest, the fact that a lot of the details and the signage and the ingress and egress and all these words I've never used so much in my life, it's nice to see that it's really being thoughtful at the sites, and appreciate all the work that's gone into that. And we'll continue, as everything seems to be a moving target these days. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So trustee Blackman, I see your hand up. And when you get done with your comment, if you could go ahead and make the motion.
Okay, thank you.
No, don't make the motion. It's trustee Rouse to say something.
Okay, I won't.
So
I'll just make a comment.
we'll get your comment.
We'll get to everybody. So I did have, though, a question / comment. In the response to the action plan, we talked about scenario number 1. If an individual comes to campus exhibiting symptoms and they're evaluated and sent home, where they would have to isolate, or at least, I guess, pursue some sort of testing. I was really curious why we don't have more communication, more action. I sent this comment on to the district earlier, but I want to bring it up here in this form because we are submitting this to the county. We know for a fact that if somebody is showing symptoms of COVID, that they have been carrying it asymptomatically for a period of time, maybe a few days to a few weeks. And that if they're showing symptoms, they were possibly in an environment on our campus exposing others to what could be COVID. It's very possible somebody who has a temperature or symptoms does not have COVID, but for the period of time, for those past 2 weeks, those individuals that were in that environment with them are possibly have also been exposed. Yet our scenario number 1 doesn't have us contacting those individuals, doesn't require any additional action. And I was very concerned why this wouldn't be elevated slightly higher, where we would actually put those families and the staff members who had contact with this individual on notice of the contact. We could always leave it to them to make the decision if they should choose to want to isolate. But I think it would be, I would really question why we wouldn't notify individuals. It could be just in that one classroom or that hub group, but I think not notifying people so they can make a decision in the best interest of their own health would be very peculiar given how we're addressing other scenarios. So I appreciate some discussion and some rationale as to why we wouldn't take this a little further, or at least ask them to go and get tested so we can alleviate the worries of others who came in contact with them.
I can address that. So the scenarios that are listed in our district reopening plan are scenarios that were shared with us directly from the Alameda County Office of Education in the guidance document. All of the scenarios that are currently listed are one of the things that I said were revised last Thursday, and so need to be updated in the reopening plan with the latest guidance. I'm not sure specifically, Trustee Blackman, if it relates exactly to what you're talking about in regards to the language that you're looking for, but the items that were the scenarios were lifted straight from the county office guidance documents.
So if I can follow up for a second now, but that doesn't preclude us to providing, we can't have looser restrictions, but we could certainly have more stringent ones. More stringent protocol on communications and outreach. That's on us. So in the interest, I would ask that we consider providing perhaps a little redo on scenario number 1, at least to allow communication to reach out to those individuals who had some contacts so they can make a decision in their own health's interest.
I think Trustee Blackman, that might be something we could do at a later date. We could get this plan approved and then we always tighten it, but we can't loosen it. So when we get closer to reopening, it may be possible to institute what you're thinking about doing as a group. Just toss that out there. So Trustee Rouse.
Thank you. I have a question. Perhaps I misunderstood. This reopening plan is for the district. Is that correct? Although we're focused on elementary schools initially, and we're further along in our discussions about that, this is in fact a K-12 district reopening plan.
But it is, but
Okay.
for the sake of what we want to reopen.
Correct. At the moment,
Yeah.
we're discussing reopening elementary, but I think I was confused at what I had heard earlier. This plan does in fact cover the entire district, and it will check the box that we need to have that plan. As Ms. Blackman pointed out, it's certainly not everything in the plan, as many of you have pointed that out, but I do think it's important that it is filed as K-12. We do not want to have to return with another plan for 7 to 12 if and when we are at that point. And certainly many of the districts that have submitted their plans submitted them K-12, even though they're in the same place we are, trying to focus first on elementary. Is that right?
It is, but we would have to resubmit anyway because we don't have a current date for secondary school. So we would have to resubmit. It doesn't mean that we would have to make any major revisions to the plan, but we would have to resubmit with a date for the secondary schools if we were planning on reopening those. So we would have to do another submission.
So when we find ourselves in that table, are we going to be listed as K something or K-12? You know the table I'm talking about, where they
That's
list.
a good question. I'm not sure how the county files them in the table in regards to us being a K-12, if it's based on being a school district or what levels are being reopened. I can get that information though, if you would like.
But this is the district plan. And we just simply have identified a target date for elementary at this time.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Trustee Blackman?
I would just follow up with what Trustee Rouse brought up. So on the cover of the document, when it notes proposed date of reopening, that would just clarify or be written to state proposed date of elementary school reopening.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Okay, that's helpful. And then I want to ask one other question. You mentioned that resubmitting. I wasn't aware that this was something we would constantly update or resubmit. So we need to, just to clarify, we need to get this into the county as quickly as possible, but we have opportunities to update it and resubmit it. Are there any specifics as to what would allow us? Is it just at our will we want to update it, or is it there's something occurs the county triggers and says to everybody, please resubmit based on this new information?
well, they could always say that in terms of based on new information. The reason I believe Curtis is suggesting we submit is we have not set a date for secondary reopening. And that's maybe why we would need to resubmit this once we have a date for the secondary levels to reopen.
I guess I have a question about that. And does that mean that every plan that has been submitted comes with a committed date from each district? Or put differently, we know we're focusing on elementary and we're looking at March 8th. What is the harm in submitting this plan with a date that would then allow us the flexibility without going back to make that decision if we so choose, and not ending up in the queue again, if you will? What is the harm in simply saying proposed date of reopening March 8th but knowing as a district that we are initially focused on looking at elementary.
Well, I think I have an answer, but Curtis has been working with this pretty intimately. So Curtis, I'm going to turn to you. on
Well, I think to answer the first question, Trustee Rouse, is that the other school districts who have submitted plans with a reopening date for both their elementary and secondary schools simultaneously. And that's the reason that they would not need to resubmit. I mean, that really is up to you as a board to determine whether or not you would like us to put another date on there. We do not have to resubmit the plan anytime there's an edit or a revision to the plan. We would just need to resubmit the plan if we're opening different levels or different school sites than we were previously making a recommendation or submitting the plan to reopen.
So do you think there is a harm in submitting a date for that as opposed to coming back? I mean, the plan document that we're submitting has all of the information for secondary in it.
It's not rewriting another plan. It's essentially we could, unless they change some of the elements of the plan they want, but it's just a matter of submitting another one that has a different date on it once we've targeted what we've got for secondary.
But here's my thing. We're going to end up in the queue all over again. We're going through a process. We have a plan that covers all these things. I mean, could we put TBD? There are a number of districts that have written TBD. They put that in there. Their plan says K-12, their date says TBD. I mean, I guess I don't see the reason why we would want to have to go through an exchange again when all we're doing is deciding that we're ready and making a date. I don't understand why that process needs to go through the county again. So I don't understand why we wouldn't just put something,
Well, and my intuitive sense tends to agree with you in terms of if we put down for secondary at this point, TBD.
right.
And again, Curtis, you've been working much closer with the county on this aspect than myself. Would we be in harm's way if we did TBD for secondary?
Again, there has to be a specific date associated with it. At least that's my understanding.
Well, I'm looking at the plans on the county website and many of them say TBD.
Okay. I can definitely look into that further in regards to whether or not we need to resubmit. I know that was the case initially, as the public health department only allowed certain levels to open at a time. And so as new levels were reopening, there had to be a separate submission for those grade levels to be able to reopen because they were different school sites. But I can definitely look into that further to see if it makes sense for us prior to submission, if a TBD is sufficient, or if they need a date. I can look into that further.
I would appreciate that because I think that would give us some flexibility and to the point that many have brought up, be focused on other things and not resubmitting a plan that you guys have already completed, which by the way, looks great. Thank you.
So what, again, I could propose here that if the board consents to, or we can reach consensus on this point, we'd like your approval of this plan with the caveat that if in fact we could submit it also for secondary, that we would just move forward with that and not have to bring it back to you for review and all that. You've seen it now. And so we do it all at once.
I would make a motion unless somebody else has a comment.
Can I clarify one thing on the grades for elementary? Does that include preschool? We were saying K, does it include DK preschool, or is it just TK or DK to 5, or?
Go ahead, Curtis.
I'll double check in the plan. It should be preschool through 5th grade, but I'll just double check. I know DK is listed in the plan, and I'm fairly certain that under Dublin L's portion, it does list.
Dublin L does list PK to.
Okay, so then it would be a preschool through 5.
Okay, just want to clarify that.
Okay, Trustee Blackman, and then we'll make a motion.
Okay, so we started talking about elementary school, and now we're veered back to secondary school should be considered under this document. And so I have to bring up one of the things I've noticed is that we're continually referring to everything within the lawful boundary of our district. In other words, you step onto our site, our sidewalk, this comes into play. But the thing that's missing in this plan is that, especially when we think about the secondary school and the high school, is that we have a huge number of students that have to use public transportation to get to our high school. And nowhere in the document do we actually provide information about how we will manage or work with our other entities, the groups that are providing public transportation, perhaps the city. We went through a lot of work to develop the drop-off areas in front of DHS when we had the vast number of buses transporting students back and forth. There was quite a bit of work that had to be done, restriping, et cetera. So what I'm not finding in the document, if we are going to go and start to discuss the secondary schools, is that how are students even getting here? I mean, we talk about 6-foot distancing and spacing, but we have a huge number of students that come to this campus that have to use public transportation. And this plan doesn't address safe access to a school. Now, maybe that doesn't fall under our purview, but I would think if we're going to say we're going to open up schools, that it should be somewhere in this plan that we are going to be working with those entities and with the city to try and figure out a way that we can get those students to our site. We may not have as much of an issue with a lot of our sites are very local to the students they serve, but in areas where students are having to take public transportation, I would think that we'd want something in here that says that we are working with those groups to address it.
So now let me remind you, this is what the county wants to know generally from us. Each site has a site-specific plan, and what you're raising are specific items for specific sites. And so you're right, those need to be addressed, but those get addressed in the site-specific plans. The county isn't even thinking about how we get our students here. They just want to know, once you've got them on your campus, what are you doing to keep them safe? Not just our students, our staff as well. And so I just want to reframe it that way. Just know, yes, from a site-specific plan, we need to address that. From getting it to getting into the queue, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you
Yeah,
for that clarification, but it's something we need to address, because although we're talking about opening up schools, secondary, if we can't solve how students get to our campus, it doesn't matter if we have a plan to reopen the secondary schools with the county at all, because we can't get the students there. So at a certain point, like, it seems like maybe a call the county would help and say, you know, you kind of need this piece to be considered, because we could do a lot of this work in solving it. And if we don't have that relationship with these other entities that are providing a service to our students, then I don't know how we get them onto campus.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Right. Those are excellent points and something we would definitely need to consider. But what's before us tonight is to go through whatever we need to get this plan approved so that we can move on to step B and we locally control all that stuff. So let's narrow our focus right now to just this plan. I do like what Trustee Rouse said about the changing of adding some sort of date for secondary. So, you know, it sounds like once you have a date in there, you can move it at will, but once the plan is approved. So why not just put in the date, and then we don't have to resubmit it and get to the back of the line. So I propose that we approve this tonight as is, with adding secondary data to be determined. If Curtis finds out that that's not workable with the county, then we just throw in a Monday. I'd say, why not April 12th? And just put in April 12th as the date for secondary, and we move it, but we'll just get it approved. And then we can move on from there. These things are like getting a box checked, and we can't go anywhere until the box is checked, but then we can do what we want to once that's done. So, with that being said, can I get a motion?
So I move that we approve the DUSD reopening plan as presented, with the opening date for elementary to be written as March 8th, the opening date for secondary to be written as TBD, pending confirmation that that's allowable, and if not, to provide a date of April 12th.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I never got a notice we had public comment, so Vicky, could you call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Riley,
Aye.
Ms. Chang,
Aye.
trustee Pelham,
Aye.
trustee Quo,
Aye.
trustee Blackman,
Aye.
trustee Rouse,
Aye.
president Jerrier.
Aye,
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
thank you.
I hope by viewing this portion of the board meeting, you have a better sense of what, in fact, we do have planned. Remember, this plan is not a comprehensive detail of every incident, our schedule, or any of that. It's really meant just to outline the health and safety features that will be in place once school reopens. As a school district, your board of trustees, your administrative staff, your teaching staff, we all want to see our students once again. But as I've said since July, if it's a choice between bringing our students back and putting them in peril of losing a life, I choose to support their health and safety. I hope you can understand this, and as we progress through this pandemic, please continue to wear your mask, keep your social distancing, and wash your hands frequently. This virus does not play favorites with anybody and can impact you and your family at a moment's notice. Thank you for your understanding, your grace, and your patience as we work through this very difficult time with so many changes on a daily basis. Please be safe.